Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for making time this afternoon to be with us. On behalf of everybody at the Institute of Bankers South Africa, we thank you for your time this afternoon, and we're looking forward to a really engaging conversation. Today is the second in a series of planned webinars that speaks to the changes and challenges in the world that we live in. And this webinar specifically focuses and looks at the thriving during a pandemic, a post-pandemic era. How do you thrive remotely? How do you work on your personal branding? How do you enhance opportunities for networking? And hopefully today's discussion will be a culmination of suggestions that can help you to thrive in a digitized world. I think that I'd like to begin this conversation and discussion by throwing out a very profound and perhaps maybe broad, wide-ranging question to the panel. And I'd probably focus it more on Jody, who's based in the UK, purely because of the fact that you are out of the country. The question is simply, how do employees get noticed for their commitment and their positive input in the organizations that they are in, especially in a virtual and digital world? You often hear this complaint from people saying, I'm putting in extra hours given that I'm working from home or I'm working in a hybrid situation. I don't really switch off in the same way that I would have had I been in person. And my superiors, my line management structure doesn't quite see that, which means they cannot recognize that. And it creates all sorts of challenges in terms of one's own mind when you feel that you are in that space of recognition that is not well placed. So what is your view on how do people navigate through that kind of a challenge, Jody, as a starting point?
The first place that I always go is before you're even, connecting with people. And that's, what are you doing to fill yourself up and to manage your own energy, your own emotions, your own confidence. And then we can talk about, making use of the time that we do have with people, being more effective in using the virtual, when to use virtual, when to actually go into the office and really connect with people in person. I think a lot of us have become quite lazy now when we're working remotely with how we're using Zoom or Teams or whatever it is that people use, and getting a little comfy instead of making that impact that we could be making.
And maybe, Nomonde, you can maybe contribute as well from the point of view of not just women who are finding themselves on the receiving end of this kind of treatment, but perhaps maybe women in technology. And as we know, technology has traditionally and for a long period of time been associated by or characterized by men in leadership positions. So perhaps you might have found in your experience that actually it's not just women, but women in technology that actually have a greater challenge to deal with in this respect.
Maybe I should answer the question not necessarily through women in tech only, because it would impact, let's call it, women in business.
Yes.
You have your kids now working, also studying from home. You then are at home as well. You are a life partner, a mother, a sister, whatever it is that you may want to call it and unpack it to be. And then you also, if we bring it back to women in tech, have a very demanding job, because the technology requirements when we're all transitioning from being full-time in the office to then transitioning to remote working meant that a lot of technologists were then actually expected to work longer hours. So you have a situation where you need to be mother if you have kids. Not everybody does. You also have to be employee. You have to solve for transitional issues that you're dealing with from a technology industry point of view. You need to pivot everyone and enable users to actually be able to work from home. When there's systems issues, you need to jump onto that. That doesn't disappear at all. You then also become the chef in the house. You have to cook. You have to make sure that people are fed. So the dynamics and issues that you are then dealing with, if we talk about gender, become quite different from what your male counterparts may have had to deal with. Because the other two aspects of homework and everything else that still needs to happen outside of the fact that you still need to do your day job. And I'm not saying men didn't have to contend with this, because we're all working from home. They did have to contend with that. Became a whole different ball game altogether. And the pressure that exerted on many, many women is not one that I personally would want to live through, because I was living through that personal crisis.
And like I said, I think Kuseli, who's got a vast knowledge and experience around marketing and digital dynamics that impact on this particular aspect of managing my objectives. Mkhoseli, if I were to zoom out somewhat from a gender discussion as it relates to standing out in a digital environment and getting ahead, so to speak, in your career, what would you say are the top 3 or top 4 suggestions that somebody could latch onto that would say, you know what, actually, given that the enabling environment's not there, given the fact that we are privileged in many ways, especially for people like ourselves on the call, given the fact that the vast majority of South Africans do not have what we've got, how would you suggest, or what would be your suggestions around making the best of the challenges that come with the enabling environment that actually is what it is?
All right. Thank you so much for that question. The number one thing that I would suggest, obviously, is what everybody has access to, which is social media, and how you manage your social media channels as an individual and as a professional. So one of the rules in there is you treat your social media channel the way you would treat the way you want to be treated when you walk down the street. You don't want to create a perception that you're a drunkard by you posting images of you over the weekend, getting drunk, posting sexual content. So number one is make sure that you create a very professional social media image, be it on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. That's number one. It must be very professional.
The energy and the confidence, I always refer to it as your magnetic confidence that we come into a space with. And so there's a lot of work that does have to be done on your own mindset when it comes to your personal branding. But then there's practical things like the way you show up and the way you package yourself. And that's changed over the years. That's one thing that's really been affected over the last couple of years is like when you work from home, there's a lot of elasticated waistbands, I'm sure.
The interesting thing about your personal brand, as you put it, and I like the fact that you started at first principles and spoke a little bit about what is meant by a personal brand, because it's one of those terms that just gets thrown around far too often, and we don't really take the time to be deliberate and thoughtful around what our personal brand actually looks like. And for me, I'm hearing you talk a lot about authenticity and the way that you reflect what goes on the inside and how does it translate and how is it perceived to those on the outside. And the point that you made around the time and the lack of, there's no luxury of time to make a second impression, because the digital world is really instantaneous. And that creates challenges for people. It actually creates anxiety for many people because you almost live in this hyper-competitive online world. But it's at this point that I'd like to bring Charlotte back into the conversation, because I think that, Charlotte, as we know that it's important for us to network with colleagues and peers, not always in an upward sense, but sort of lateral networking. How do you do that? How would one go about actually, exploring opportunities to network laterally? Because you never know when that lateral network might actually have an upward benefit for you in some time to come. So what are your thoughts on that, Charlotte?
You're so right in that you need to consider all aspects of networking. And I'm certainly an advocate of networking, and I certainly encourage anyone to network with intention and purpose, especially within your working environment. Now, networking, as far as I'm concerned, is essential in the workplace, since it will help you to develop and improve your skill set. It also helps you to stay on top of the latest trends in your industry. It helps you to keep a pulse on the job market. And, you were talking, Dr. Patel, about mentoring. And this is exactly where you will be meeting your prospective mentors and possible partners and clients. And I think within the aspect of not just looking at mentors that are senior to you in your work environment, but your peers. I mean, how one can be mentored by one another, because mentoring is in different formats and on different levels. So mentoring, and I'm with you there, is essential in your workplace and, from a personal aspect as well.
And before I ask Nomonde to actually speak a bit more about the benefits of doing so, I think that one of the challenges that a lot of people face is the idea of being deliberate, but at the same time being organic in the way that you establish your network. Because the best relationships in the world tend to happen out of an organic mindset. You get to know somebody, you sort of have common interests, and you kind of vibe with the next person. And that often leads to its own set of benefits. But when it comes to something more structured, so to speak, something more formal, like a mentorship relationship, you almost need that to be a balance between being deliberate and letting things happen organically. And somebody gave me a really good way of explaining mentorship. They said that a mentor is somebody that you need help from, and you go to that person when the need is there. But you should actually try and develop what is called a sponsor. But there are one or two questions that actually speak directly to the skill set of our panelists. And Jody in particular, I think in my introduction I mentioned that you take great pleasure in getting people to step up and stand out and to shine. And maybe this question is apt for you. My question is, I'm an introvert and I'm very shy. I found it very difficult to articulate and demonstrate things in such a way that I've missed so many opportunities just because I'm scared to talk. It becomes more difficult when I'm brought to the spotlight. I'm not fluent in English. That is how also becoming more of a problem. How do I gain confidence and self-esteem? Jody, any advice to the participant who sent this question in?
Yeah, so first of all, I want to just distinguish between being an introvert and being shy or underconfident, because they're not the same thing. So I am an introvert. No one ever believes me, but I am. So I am more introverted. So we'll just put that aside. In this instance, it sounds a lot more like a confidence issue and something about the beliefs that you have about yourself and your right to be at the table and your right to speak up and how confident you are in what you know. And that's where, in this instance, I would do a lot of work around those beliefs and actually creating the belief that you have a right to be at that table. And there's so much evidence of people where not even a great level of English is, they're able to speak and they're still able to be successful. So we've got evidence that it is possible. But if you are going into a situation thinking that I can't communicate what I want to communicate, I don't have a right to be here, what the hell do I know? When you're going in with those thoughts, it's going to be affecting, of course, how you communicate and where you communicate and how you hold yourself and everything that you are bringing to that table. So the first place in this instance is getting to those beliefs and actually doing a lot of work on your own confidence.
And as we start to wrap this discussion up, as we start to draw towards a close, I think it's important for us to reflect on that, to reflect on the role that we play in our own lives and in our own careers. And people talk about taking ownership of your own network and taking ownership of your own career progression. It sounds easy, but it's difficult to do. That's usually the response that people give. That's okay. It's okay to be difficult. Difficult things are not something that you necessarily need to run away from. Run towards it. See what happens. It's as much of a risk as running away from it. And I suppose that's my final nugget of wisdom, so to speak, if I could share one. And I'd like to invite each one of the panelists to maybe in 20 seconds each give a closing thought for our panelists, for our participants on the call today. Maybe let's start with Nomonde. Nomonde, your closing remarks and thoughts for today's discussion.
Thank you, Dr. Patel, and to the panelists. I think my closing remarks would be, live your authentic life. You can only be the best version of yourself, and that is who people would want to see.
No matter what happens, I will be okay. And if you can really integrate that into every little cell of your being by repeating it 1,000 million times a day, no matter what happens, I will be okay, you really become unstoppable.
I want to say celebrate your achievements. I think every single day is important, and in every 24 hours, you've done something that you deserve to be celebrated for.
The saying that says it's all in a day's work, it has proved through test of times that it's true. before the golden age, now in the age of technology, nothing can substitute hard work. So work on your craft, make sure that you master that before you can take your service out there to the rest of the world, because it's very ruthless out there.
And with that, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to thank each and one of our panelists this afternoon, Nomonde, Kuseli, Charlotte, as well as Jody from the UK, as well as to each and every one of the participants on the call, and everybody involved in making today possible, and all the team at the Institute of Bankers South Africa. But from my side, thank you so much and all the best.